Welcome back to Point of View in Literary Text, Part 2. Now go ahead and cut out and glue in this paper right here, all the way down to the bottom, and the questions for it on the following page. This is what we're going to be working on in this lesson. Now, the directions here say to consider the situation in the center box. How would the situation appear from different people's point of view? How would their perspective of the event differ? In each box, explain how that particular individual would view how the situation occurred. So what we're going to be doing in this lesson is we're going to be looking at a situation, and then we're going to be seeing how each character would respond to that situation. And if they were to be the one telling the story, how would they tell the story? The point of this lesson is to help you realize that depending on the character that's telling the story, you're going to be receiving different types of information. So let's look at the situation. It says, the bell rings. A student is running down the hall on his way to class and slips on a large puddle. He falls and breaks his leg. Wow, that sounds like a terrible situation to be in. Now, let's start with the student. If the student were telling the story, let's go ahead and try to predict how he would say it. Now, the student is probably late for class. Why else would they be running? At least let's hope that that's why they're running. So I'm going to go ahead and write that in. So the student is probably late for class. And they might blame themselves for the accident because they broke a rule by running. So they might blame themselves for the accident because they broke a rule by running. And they should have been on time to begin with. So, and they should have been on time to begin with. So if I were the student, I would probably say something along these lines for my story. I was running late for class, and so I decided to make a sprint for it so that I wouldn't be so late. Unfortunately, I didn't see the puddle, and so I slipped and I fell while I was running. I know it's my fault because I was obviously breaking a rule, and I should have been on time to begin with. So that's what the story would sound like if the student was the narrator. Now let's focus on the teacher. Now, the teacher would probably blame the student for running because clearly they were breaking a rule, but they might also be concerned about whose fault it is that the puddle was there in the first place. They might blame themselves for not monitoring the hallway to stop the student as well. So let's go ahead and let's write that in. So the teacher would blame the student for running, but might be concerned about whose fault it is that the puddle is there. Because remember, the teacher should probably notify the office if there is a puddle. They might blame themselves for not monitoring the hall. because obviously this whole thing could have been prevented if they were monitoring the hall. So this is what this story would sound like if the teacher were telling it. I went out to the hallway because I heard a loud crash. I then see student A sitting on the floor crying because they had broken their leg. They had apparently slipped on a puddle. I don't know how the puddle got there, and I'm sorry for not reporting the fact that there was a puddle there. I did not see it. And unfortunately, this whole thing could have been prevented if I had been monitoring the hallway, because I could have stopped and prevented the student from running. Okay, now let's continue. Let's look at the janitor. Now, the janitor might have forgotten to put out a wet floor sign, so they might be concerned about being blamed. So let's write that down. So the janitor might have forgotten to put out a wet floor sign, so they might be blamed for the accident. However, he might not have known about the accident and would then blame the teacher for not reporting the spill. So, however, he might not have known about the accident and would then blame the teacher for not reporting the spill. So if I were the janitor, the story would sound like this. Either, oh, I had forgotten to put a wet sign out, so I'm so entirely sorry. This is totally my fault. The student would have seen the sign and known not to run. Or I didn't know about this the puddle in the first place, and teacher A should have told me by reporting the puddle so that I could have come and either put a wet floor sign or cleaned up the spill. Now, let's look at the principal. Now, the principal would be concerned about liability, for sure. So, the principal would be concerned about liability. And that's basically, I don't want to get sued. They might be worried about the parent's reaction. And they might blame the janitor for not cleaning the spill on time. Or they might blame the teacher for not monitoring or reporting the spill. And I know there's no space, but they would also probably blame the student for running. Okay, so this is what it would look like for the principal. If the principal is telling the story, I was told by teacher A that student A was running in the hallway when they slipped and crashed on a puddle. Unfortunately, the janitor either did not know or did not place out a wet floor sign, and the teacher was not monitoring the hall like they should have been. However, if the student hadn't been running in the first place, none of this would have happened. Now, go ahead and click on part 3 in order to do the second half of this lesson.